So first of all, I think that's a mind-blowing film. From the reaction from everybody out here who's just sort of staring, I think you're all trying, like, after I watched it the first time, this is the second time I saw it, the first time my wife and I watched it together, we were left with a very complex set of emotions. One, we were amazed by the resilience of these people and the complex operation they put into place to try to keep the Oneg Shabbat alive and document it for future generations, and that sort of strength and that resilience that it took. On the other hand, we were shocked that we've seen Holocaust imagery before, so we were not 100% shocked about the depravity, but again, every time we see it, it's hard to believe people treated each other that way. At the same time, the film plus was engaging, emotional, fascinating, and a huge complex of emotions. So I don't know how many of you are feeling a very complex set of emotions in reaction to that film. Okay, so that's most of you. Okay. So today, my goal is to give you the opportunity to take advantage of these fabulous panelists that we have and to ask as many questions as you want, okay? So first, again, we have Roberta Grossman here with us, who wrote and produced and directed this fabulous I don't have to pretend to be a neutral moderator. I think it's a masterpiece. To my left is Karen Paikin Barall, who's director of Hadassah's Washington office and the chief lobbyist for the organization. Welcome her, please. And to her left, okay, we have Courtney Radsch, who's the advocacy director at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Please welcome her. The way I'd like to, I'm Ron Halber, I'm the director of the JCRC here in Washington. So I'd like to, thank you. So I would like to, we're going to start by each asking our panelists a question, get some conversation going, and then we're going to ask, then we're going to, maybe we may follow up with a second or not, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask a question. The microphone is in the front. If you spend more than 2 sentences prefacing your question, I'm going to cut you off. Okay, questions, as we always say in our conference calls, questions end with a question mark. We want to make sure that as many of you have an opportunity to ask questions as possible. So Roberta, first of all, what was the primary motivation for you to make this documentary? And if you wanted every single person in every audience that ever watched this film, what are 3 things you would want them to remember?
Okay. Primary motivation for making this film. It took me 7 years to make the film, and then I've been traveling with it for the last 2 years. So this is almost a full decade of my life, and I think I feel time very well spent. I was starting to develop another film that took place in the interwar period in Warsaw, in Jewish Warsaw, between the wars. And I read a review of Sam Cassell's book, Writer History, and I went and got the book, and I was 10 pages in and I realized a couple of things. One, that Sam had created a masterwork of history, that he had done an incredible work of historical rescue, and that what I was reading and what you just learned about in the film was the most important untold story of the Holocaust. I mean, clearly not untold because Sam had told it, but I see myself as being a popularizer of historical work, the work of historians. Sort of the Barbara Tuchman of the documentary world, at least that would be nice to be thought of that way. I spent my whole life reading and learning about the Holocaust and being quite obsessed with it from the time I was very little. And I just was astounded, as perhaps some of you are, that I didn't know the story. To me, it's like the Oneg Shabbos archive is the Dead Sea Scrolls coming out of the rubble of the ghetto. And of course in Jerusalem we have this magnificent museum, and scholars have been studying the Dead Sea Scrolls ever since they came out of the ground, and the Oneg Shabbos archive is equally as important a treasure, and yet has been relatively unknown. So it was my primary motivation to help Sam unbury the archive, and to bring the magnificent writing and the incredible characters of people who created the Opening Shabbos to your attention. 3 things I'd like you to take away. Wow, that was a bad time in history.
I think we got that one.
Oh wait, no, I'll scratch that one. It's very important that when we see that people, that leaders rising to power by demonizing the other, that we do something to stop that before it's too late. That it's important to have borders that are patrolled but open enough that when people are truly in desperate need that they can come to this great refuge that America's always been. And 3, one of the reasons I was so glad that you're here from the Committee to Protect Journalists is that I see the film as being about a group of people who are willing to die for the truth, and often our journalists are in that position today of going and finding the truth and often paying with their lives for telling it. And I have more to say about that later, but I don't want to dominate the conversation when we have these other people to talk.
Thank you for your answer. Karen, the Hadassah has been successful in passing the House with the Never Again Education Act, and I understand it passed on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, so yesher koach to you and to Hadassah. So, if you can, for our audience, if you can explain the bill, its chances for passing the Senate, and if it succeeds, how will we measure its success?
Okay, so thank you so much, and JCPA and JCRC, thank you, and Roberta, that was a phenomenal film. I wish we could show it on Capitol Hill, because it's phenomenal.
Yeah, just you're welcome to any time. Just let me know.
We will be arranging that.
So Rod's correct. The House bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support about a week and a half ago. And what the bill is, it's called the Never Again Education Act, and it creates a federal fund for Holocaust educational materials, for resources, and for funds that teachers can apply for to either get something like a substitute teacher to their class while they go to a training, or pay for their travel to a training on Holocaust education, or to bring in a Holocaust educator speaker into their classroom. And what we're hoping is that there is going to be an official curriculum for Holocaust education. What we have found, even in the 11 states that mandate Holocaust education, there is no curriculum offered. So some teachers think that just, reading Anne Frank's story is, checking the box and doing Holocaust education. And other teachers, go in a lot more depth. It's really at the discretion of the teacher to decide how they want to teach the Holocaust, which is not working. So we're hoping that this fund will actually have an official curriculum at the federal government that would be accessed. And right now, so the bill passed the House. We have 31 co-sponsors in the Senate, and nothing's easy, but we're hoping to gather more momentum. We could use everybody's help. We have 300,000 Hadassah members in chapters, and they're working with their JCRCs, and they're working with their federations and other groups to try to get support and get their senators to sponsor. We have very few states that have both senators sponsoring. We need a large amount of Republican senators to sponsor. So we really need this to be a grassroots effort to get everyone involved and hopefully get the bill to the president's desk before the end of the year.
I just wanted to point out the 3 things that Roberta pointed out about that she wants people to take from the film are all 3 things that our JCPA and our JCRCs work on.
Well, thank you for coordinating that with me.
I appreciate that. That was a commercial. And also, what Karen is talking about with education, you should know right now, along with my friend David Cohen in Richmond, that we are pushing a bill in Virginia. For those of you who are outside the area, we've got Maryland and Virginia right here. We're about to hopefully pass a bill that would mandate that by 2021, the Virginia Department of Education will be providing a proper pedagogical explanation for the Holocaust when they review social studies curriculum in that time. So every one of you has a role, not only on the federal level, but on the state level, to making sure that that Holocaust curriculum is seen, it is studied by students. Courtney, I wanted to ask you a question. The truth is, I think in many ways, was the topic of this film in many ways. Are we going to let, were the Jewish people of Warsaw going to let the Nazis tell the truth with their propaganda, or was the Jewish people going to allow to be told what happened? And today, in an era of social media, everybody's got a platform, everybody's got a megaphone, everybody can tweet, everybody can get on Facebook. So it seems to me that as a profession, and it's a personal belief, that the role of the journalist is more sacred than ever before, because we have to make sure that truth is out there, not fiction. So the question is, how do we protect journalists today who are out there physically putting themselves on the line when they want to get the truth? And secondly, how do we as JCRCs, which are venerable institutions and we are respected to be statesmen or stateswomen-like in our community and to provide facts and guidance and nuance, how do we make sure that we're doing so and leading our communities properly?
So that's a large question. First of all, thank you for such an amazing, powerful film. So journalists are, the first draft of history, and truth is such a challenging subject, but I think that what we know from journalists is that they are trying to document facts and what they see on the ground and what they are able to report about that experience as they're living it. And so I am a journalist. I'm also a scholar. I did research in Egypt during the creation of the youth movement there. And the facts and the experiences and the observations that you get during a time, during the photos and the videos and the documentation of these experiences are different than when you look backwards at something. So it's very important to realize that journalism is a fundamental part of helping to figure out and construct the truth. And journalists are at grave risk. It is one of the few professions where people are routinely murdered because of their profession. Most of the journalists killed since we began keeping records in 1992 were murdered. And
how many is that, by the way?
1,342.
Is it from any, are these reporters from any one particular region, or is it just throughout the world?
Globally, based on what we systematically document in terms of the journalists. And by journalists, we mean those who are acting as journalists. Not that you have to be licensed or accredited, because we all know that Nazi Germany was not giving out accreditation to people doing journalism. And that's something very important for us to recall, that lots of the people doing journalism today in Syria, for example, they're citizen journalists. And watching your film made me think of Raqqa is being slaughtered silently, a citizen journalist group that reported from Raqqa, the capital of the so-called self-declared Islamic State. And they created a network very similar to what was in the movie, where they had citizens documenting what they saw. And they had to be very closed and very secret about it, despite even being secret, and some of them fleeing to Turkey and then later to Germany. Several of their members were murdered by ISIS. So there's so many lessons to be learned. First of all, how far we've come, and yet how far we have not come. The fact that still the people who are on the front lines trying to document this, trying to do journalism, are so routinely tracked down because of the work that they do. And now it's not only about the physical safety of journalists, about of course, the training before you go into a war zone and knowing the dangers you face. But most of the journalists killed are local journalists documenting what is happening in their own towns, in their own cities. But now you also have to think about digital security, the vast surveillance capabilities that exist today, both voluntary and involuntary. I can't imagine what we have, the infrastructure that we have created that could be used for evil. And Also, here the challenge was to preserve a small amount of information. And there's something different about today, which is that there's so much information that the truth can get drowned out. And one of the biggest things I think we have to grapple with today is the undermining of the idea of truth and the power that these platforms that we've decided to grant, the right to basically be the primary platforms of communication play over enabling what we see and what we don't see. So, when we're countering violent extremism online, that results in tens of thousands of videos documenting human rights abuses and war crimes in Syria and eradicates them from the internet. So then what happens? What does an archive, where do you find this if they're eradicated? And there are all these efforts in the US and the EU and elsewhere to eradicate terrorist content from the internet that is also catching up documentation of human rights abuses and journalism on the front lines. And it makes me wonder what happens to history and who gets to write that history if algorithms from Silicon Valley are determining what gets to be saved to YouTube, what gets to be seen.
Thank you. If people would like to start lining up, if you have any questions, we are happy. We're going to continue, but if you want to come to the mic, this is your forum. I can't believe there's not questions. Come on.
Hi,
please.
Thank you very much. It is a remarkable film, and I commend you tremendously for what you've done. My question is I have several questions. One is, who else or where else has this film been shown? How can it be shown in other places that we might like it to be shown? And if you could answer those at least to begin with, and let everybody else who like to.
So the film has had quite a remarkable distribution, and it was shown at film festivals all over the world, Jewish film festivals and others. It was in Berlin, it was in Rome, Palm Springs, and 100 Jewish film festivals around the world, and then it was at a theatrical release around the country. But the thing I'm most proud of is that we had last International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we had a global screening event where we had 355 screenings, 55 countries and 14 languages. We had
Including Poland?
There was in Poland, some screenings in Poland. Actually, there were about 50 screenings in Poland that day. And our anchor screening was at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. The film was just broadcast on Discovery last week for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And right now I'm working extremely hard on educational distribution. The film is still available for screenings for communities, colleges, universities. I appreciate that what you're saying is like you want people to see the film, and just so that you should know, we haven't been sitting on this film. It's been in wide circulation for 2 years. It's just very hard to break through when you don't have a big advertising.
Let me follow up on one question. Has there been, when you've shown this group, when you've shown this film, plus, as you said, before non-Jewish audiences, faith leaders, clergy, what's been the reaction?
Well, the reaction, I'll just give you an example of showing the film in Germany, which I've done in person twice. It was also broadcast in Germany, and it was broadcast in Poland and broadcast in France. Actually, just last week it was broadcast in Israel. In Germany, the response of audiences was the same as the response from Jewish audiences, but just with the extra overlay of guilt. People are very moved by people's stories, by personal stories.
Thank you. May I ask one of the questions? One of the other participants. What do you think is holding up the bill, or any, when you said one senator, you need a second senator in a state or a second, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So what do you think is holding it up? Where's the obstacle?
So there hasn't been major obstacles. I mean, lobbying the bill, and there was always different incentives when, unfortunately, there was an incident that happened. We were able to get more support and more signatures. So it has funding attached to it. So there are more, there are libertarians, there are conservative Republicans that don't like money attached to any legislation. So that is a little bit of a hurdle right now for us in the Senate. It's a small amount, it's $2 million a year for 5 years, so it's $10 million. We're expecting it to be a public-private partnership, so donations would also go into the fund. So that's a little bit, that's why we got opposition from 5 Republicans in the House. But overwhelmingly, it's not really an issue. Right now in the Senate, things have just been delayed because of the impeachment, so nothing has really gotten done. In the House, we had a little bit of concern. There was some pushback from some Democrats that wanted to see other genocides and education for other genocides and not just the Holocaust. But eventually we worked our way through that.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
I can say that a lot of JCRCs that have been trying to push legislation on the state level when they try to do Holocaust education also find that they want other groups want their narrative attached, and it becomes a very tricky situation about how do you maintain the exclusivity of what the Holocaust is and at the same time be a good coalition partner. Please.
First, I want to thank you for your work. As a child of 2 Holocaust survivors, it means a great deal to me. A comment you made struck me, which is you shouldn't be able to check a box on the Holocaust education by reading Anne Frank, just as from the work I do, you shouldn't be able to check a box from reading Just Mercy in terms of mass incarceration. My question is, what's it going to take for everybody, all of us in this room, to stop the horror that we watch every day and use this film to understand that we're living through the same history and we don't appear to be as angry or as we should be, or we don't have a sense of urgency. We read the books. So
can you clarify about living through the same?
I think we're living in a time of 1933 to 1939.
In the United States or Europe?
Absolutely, on the border of our southern border.
Okay, so you're drawing
I'm drawing an analogy. I'm saying, what is it going to, this film is important, the message is important. This work we're doing is important. What is it going to take for all of us to understand we can't read a book, we can't watch the film, we have to do more?
Who'd like to take this?
I think that just being involved in general, I'm not sure if you're referring to current state situation of anti-Semitism, which I have.
The intersection of all of this going on.
So I think a little bit of that question is a little politically charged, so I'm going to avoid that area of the political. But I think we just all have to, what we've learned is to not stand by and watch things happen and to react. That when we see somebody being picked on or abused, and that's one of the things that we hope comes out of Holocaust education, that you stand up and you say something and you don't let things pass by.
So I understand what you're saying about it being politically charged, but it was politically charged in Germany to be anti-Nazi. When it says they rose to power, and I'm not trying to say that it's Nazi Germany right now. I think that's where we get tripped up. I think that what concerns me is similar patterns in terms of totalitarian or fascist kind of government or all over the world. And sort of a coalition of strongmen, that worries me. But I think that we can't, I understand in your position you can't, but I think that we have to be political. All we have at this point is the ability to vote. And we have to vote our conscience, because you and I are not that powerful. The government is very powerful. I just want to say one thing about, what year is it? Is it 1933, 1934, 1935? I don't know. I'd like to think maybe it's 1934, right? But the thing that we talked about a little bit before is that some of you may or may not know that in 1933, when Hitler came to power, there was still a press. It was very, very weakened because of the economy and the terrible economy of Germany, but there were still some free newspapers and some free press. And every time somebody reported, the brown shirts murdered 20 socialists over here, or they dragged, 20 Jews out of their homes and killed them, Hitler would say, Lügenpresse, which translates to fake news. And I have to say that the people who are much smarter than me know that all over the world on the far right, when that term is used from the highest levels of power, that's dog whistle. So we have to be awake. That's all. We don't all have to agree, but we all have to be awake.
So we've seen this idea of fake news really take hold. So we, at the Committee to Protect Journalists, we systematically document the imprisonment of journalists. We had a category called false news charges. It's been used in a couple of countries since 1992 for the spread of false news. But we saw a tremendous increase in the use of fake news, false news charges to imprison journalists since 2017. We've seen that around the world. We have tracked how the elevation of the idea of fake news to delegitimize journalism as a practice and a profession, as the first draft of history, to pillory individual journalists and news outlets, and to undermine, the very concept of what journalists do, first become elevated through the rhetoric of President Trump, and now throughout the political sphere. We see it at the state level and local level, and around the world. We have seen Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, in Hungary, in Poland, in Russia, in Egypt, in Ethiopia, around the world, using this idea of fake news, which has become really, really problematic. We've seen we had, I believe it was 11 journalists in prison on false news charges in 2016, and last year there were 26. So we're seeing around the world that this idea of fake news is being used to delegitimize. So I think that's very problematic, and that's just a fact. My colleague did an analysis of all of President Trump's tweets. 10% of them have, during the period of study, targeted the media, vilified the media. He told Leslie Stahl, reportedly, that the point of denigrating and calling the news media fake news was so that no one would believe them when they reported something negative. And we're seeing that as a tactic used by leaders, democratic and authoritarian, around the world. And that's a scary thing, right? And that's, I think, what we really have to worry about, because we have to go back to your point about these, human rights violations taking place in this country. How do you know when they're getting to a point of no return? I remember just recently reading in The Garden of Beasts, which was about the US ambassador in Germany during the very beginning of the rise of Hitler. When journalists were trying to get reports about some of the atrocities taking place into the newspaper to get people to care, and it was really hard. So how do you know, when it's too late?
Let's go to the next question. Thank you. John?
Thank you so much for this wonderful movie and presentation. I'll just put my questions out real quickly. One is, where did the Oneg Shabbos, the idea behind it, originate? Next, and quickly, also, where did did Hadassah ever have any connection with the Joint? Were there any things they did historically that helped Jewish cause? And then lastly, what is done today to help protect journalists that we devised recently to help protect them in the field? Because it's a terrible problem. Thank you.
I'll start very quickly. It's a good question. Oneg Shabbos was basically the YIVO in the ghetto. The YIVO, as many of you know, was a Jewish scientific research institute basically studying the Yiddish culture of Eastern Europe, and they were collecting, they had Zomlers, people all over who were sending things in and collecting, like Alan Lomax in the United States, folklore, photographs, stories, and Ringelblum really loved YIVO, was very actively involved, and in many ways, the Oneg Shabbos was YIVO in the ghetto.
So Hadassah is an organization, it's the Women's Zionist Organization of America, and I see two of our volunteers in the audience, Jane Jacobson and Sue Polanski. It's 116 years old, and it has a phenomenal history. If anyone ever has an opportunity to read the history of Hadassah and what Jewish women did to create the medical system in the state of Israel, but also what they did for world Jewry. And they have constantly taken an active role in Soviet Jewry in many different aspects, and this was just a natural interest for Hadassah and everybody's a mother, everybody's a grandmother, and we also have associates that are men members of Hadassah. And this was something that was actually brought to our attention by Carolyn Maloney, who is good friends with our CEO, Janice Weinman, and she asked if Hadassah would take this up. And knowing that our volume and how active we are, it just seemed like a natural cause. And really, it had been 20 years that they had been trying to get this bill passed through Congress. And this is the first year that we've had success. And Hadassah really put everything it had into it, all of our resources and all of our activism. And it really, proved, we have a slogan that we're the women who do. And I really believe that Hadassah is the women that do.
But their intersection with the joint was my question.
So the joint, so I don't know about that as much. I know that there is a history of us doing a lot of work, throughout the years, but I'd have to find out what that would be.
With respect to what's being done to protect journalists, so first of all, since 2011 and like the uprisings in the Middle East, things have gotten much worse. So in 2014, Jim Foley and Steve Sotloff were murdered in a very violent, public, propagandistic way by ISIS, and they were freelancers. And that raised awareness among many in the industry that news organizations have a moral responsibility to the freelancers that they hire. That you can't simply take a story for $25 from the front lines in Syria or any other conflict and expect that that reporter is going to be at all safe. It costs money to get training, to have the right communications equipment, the right security plan, the right fixer, the driver, whatever it is, not to mention the local staff that you're working with. So that was a big wake-up call, led to the freelancer safety principles and the creation of ACOS Alliance, which stands for a culture of safety. And that is many major news organizations, press freedom groups, journalist organizations working together to help improve freelancer safety and to inculcate an idea of a culture of safety in the newsroom, so that if you're talking to your editor, you can talk about safety. And for women, this has meant also the issue of online harassment, which is an endemic part of the experience of being a journalist for many women and others in minority positions. So that was one thing. The second thing that I've noticed, so I've been in the field for about 10 years since I got kicked out of Dubai for an article I wrote. I've been doing press freedom advocacy, and one of the things I've seen recently, especially in the wake of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi and the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia, an investigative journalist and blogger in Malta, is that there is more solidarity in the media community. And so now, so there were a collective of journalistic groups that continued the investigations into political corruption in Malta that happened after Daphne was murdered. And then with Jamal, and the role that Saudi Arabia is playing in the world and keeping that in the headlines, I think you've seen that the media community is no longer thinking that standing up for press freedom and the safety of journalists is somehow activism. If journalists don't stand up for themselves, who is going to? And I mean, somehow that's maybe similar, to the idea that you have to stand up for your own rights and that idea. And the solidarity. There is now a One Free Press Coalition, which Forbes, was kind of behind, and all of these media organizations every month are publishing a list of 10 urgent cases of journalists under threat around the world. The Washington Post created a press freedom partnership initiative. There's this thing called Forbidden Stories, where they continue the investigations and reporting that journalists in prison or who were killed are doing. So, I think the solidarity and the realization that there's this moral responsibility are hopefully helping keep journalists safer.
Sir?
Thank you again. I was very struck, to follow up on what the gentleman asked, on Ringelblum's influence by YIVO. I was wondering if you had, used YIVO's resources yourself in doing the film, and also if you have any comment on YIVO's current status, which I understand they have some financial difficulties.
I did use a lot of YIVO resources, and if it doesn't sound like bragging, Sam Casso and I were honored by YIVO this year, which felt great because the story is most important. So it's like the center of the love for Ringelblum in the story, along with the joint. And I have no comment on YIVO's current situation, other than I hope that they receive the funding that they need to do the work that they want to and should be doing.
Can I just add something, because it's about freedom of information, it's about access to information, your question ultimately. And there was just a report last week that the U.S. archives have okayed the destruction of millions of documents related to the Department of Homeland Security. And it's not the exact same question, but it's the same idea, like the importance of preserving official history as well as personal history. And it goes to the lady before who was asking about, you know, what's happening at the border, and this is all interconnected. And I think we need to really push back and be aware when historical information, even if it's recent history, is going to be destroyed.
Please.
Following the notion of interconnections, I think of your film as not only documentary but art, and I think it's important that there be recognition that the impact of art, culture, creative work is also part of what is called for in this era, because people not only take in facts, they take in, you know, emotion. And I'm a little concerned about the notion of federal curriculum development, but I'm wondering if any of you have looked into the kind of curriculum that would teach younger people as well as older how to understand media, how to figure out what is actually fake news, or what is, you know, justifiable understanding of what is going on.
I'm sure a lot of schools are dealing with media literacy. It's a little far afield from what we're talking about, but certainly critical.
You could
But
extend that to adults. How do we figure out what's
Right.
not just children, but adults?
Right, that's true. But what I'd like to respond to the first thing you said about art. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that's so moving about Ringelblum and that whole community was the way that they kept on generating what it meant to be a human being. And for them, that meant literary evenings and poems and songs and plays and writing and essays, and also orphanages and soup kitchens, and it's a very beautiful community, actually. I do hope, I want to talk to you later, because I've actually been working on an initiative that's primarily here right now about bringing films into the curriculum, because I think that young people learn through the medium of, you know, the visual medium, and I think that part of Holocaust education, there's so many great films, and it has to be part of all the curriculum. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
I also had in mind, I guess, some local people here may have known of. There's a play been developed here at Georgetown, a biography of Jan Karski, that is really like another piece of the particular story of those who wanted to get out the word to the West of what was happening. And the play is continuing to appear. David Strathorn, many of you know the actor. So there are many ways to tell the story, and some of them really reach people in their
Well, I mean, with this film, I mean, the reason that I did it the way that I did it was because I wanted it to be a hybrid between a documentary and a dramatic feature, and I wanted it to have the gravitas of a documentary with scholars and accuracy and the emotional pull of a dramatic feature. That was my goal.
This gentleman's question will be the final
I
question.
just want to comment about the Holocaust education. So the educational materials will all be coming out of the Holocaust Museum. So it's going to be done by experts in the field. And again, this is not a mandate, so this will be a resource available, so that for teachers that are looking for that.
And I mean, media literacy, I think, is very important, but I don't think we even teach civics in our schools anymore. I mean, there's so much to be done, and I hope that, you know, this education initiative happens, because people, you know, the last Holocaust survivors are no longer going to be available to speak in person about what has happened, and so it makes education even more important. And media and information literacy is like a big buzzword now, but it is really fundamentally important, but it has to be coupled with history and civics and other educational initiatives.
Final question.
So I have sort of a historical point. I heard a book reading this past year that claimed that half of the Jews that were murdered in Eastern Europe during the Second World War were actually murdered by their people from their own city.
I don't know the statistics. Are you asking if I think that's true?
Well, I'm asking, well, one part of it is whether it's true, but whether or not did that come up in the writings, that
Well, it came up in the writings because they began to document the killings, the Einsatzgruppen killings, and those were done in, there were a group effort between Nazis and the local people. The Holocaust by bullets is a very important and overlooked topic. I think we're wrapping up, right?
So first of all, thank you, sir. First of all, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us here this evening. Second, I'd like to thank the World Jewish Congress, which joined the JCRC of Greater Washington, which is my privilege to serve as the executive director, for sponsoring this evening tonight. And we're very proud. Thank you all for being here. And I want one more person, Melanie Gorelick. Thank you so much for putting all the hard staff work in the JCPA staff. And if this is any indication about how the conference is, we're going to be off to a great start. We have well over 200 people who came to tonight's event, and it's the Saturday night, and the conference really kicks off tomorrow morning. So this is a great start, great questions. And one more thing, one woman was saying about how do we get active. This is the organization where every day on the ground in the JCRCs and in the National Jewish Organizations that are standing up for what's right. So if you're concerned about doing something, you're at the right place. With that, Laila Tov, and have a good night.
Thanks very much.
Is there a way to get what you filmed?
That's not mine.
Oh, you're not involved in the film.
No, it's the, I'll tell you, one of the organizers.
We're going to have a rowdy Cincinnati convention there.
The second thing here.
Sorry, I know what to put it.
I'll see you in the morning. I'm going to go.
I mean, it could be like a 1 or 2 sentence.
Yeah, just send me like what you're looking for, and obviously if there's something I should say.
It's for all ages, but I want to get it into school, like to human rights. It's to like make it human rights come alive and to popularize the UDHR. I'm Diane Crum.
Okay, Diane, thanks. Hi.
Hi. So, my name is Jerry Jancis. I used to teach math at the University of Maryland.
Okay.
And one of my concerns is that, briefly I was just one official state of California charged with reading middle school math textbooks. And what I noticed is that they had a collection of myths, which the textbook writers agreed on were true, and it's just incorrect math. And
there's a lot of issues with textbooks all over the world.
but usually it's not math.
Yeah.
The other ones, of course, are true. But of course, the other thing that happens is that people are not taught how to recognize non sequiturs.
Not only the archives here, but the archives of the Spanish Civil War are being decimated as well. Because this is something of a situation. It's not contemporary. But particularly this is Margaret Civil around the world. Well, we work with the Human Rights Watch and Corpus Human Rights Watch. But also the Federation of Journalists. First of all, Logic and Contemporary Rhetoric by Howard Kennedy. About thinking logically in sequiturs and non-sequiturs.
I just want to ask you a question. My name's Roberta.
Do you?
I'm the president of the JCRC in Cincinnati, but my other life, I teach Russian at the law school. Oh, very cool. So I do all your stuff.
My name's Ari David with the Jewish League.
So I wrote a chapter on it.
That's what I meant, Courtney.
Looks at hate speech intersection. To the Santa College. She used to be the head of Arnold Prime. Well, it was in the 90s. It was in the 90s. That's when we wrote our book about yeah.
She was active in our own
About all these online.
Can be possible, I really think.
So, anyhow, I was wondering, and I have no idea about this, but would you all be interested in coming to Wall Street? So, your car is can you talk? So the article right here was black. I'm Doris.
Do you know mathematicians, prophets, like for example, just walking out, my niece just got a master's design, master's and master's in mathematics. Well, I really
You can never do that. It's possible. He has a different actor. So that was what?
Yes. I've heard so much the last 2 years. I've heard so much the last 2 years. Yeah. You can be like, will you be here for the time?
What are you doing?
Oh, Andrew, I'll send you some stuff of what we're doing. You might find it interesting. You can never tell. We connect the world as the organized Jewish community, the organized Jewish communities, and the organized labor movement. We're still doing some good stuff. Yes, it is. We're all 7.5% of it. I'm optimistic. Wait.
That's why he. That's why. Thank you.